Welcome to the Business of Defense. I'm Rich Brady, your host and CEO at the Society of Defense Financial Management. SDFM proudly sponsors this podcast on Federal News Network. SDFM is the premier association of finance and accounting professionals who work in government and business in the defense sector. Our goal is to bring you inside the companies working to drive change in the defense sector, to hear directly from their business leaders, and to understand how they create value for their companies and their customers. We have a special guest today who is able to join us as a result of the recent administration transition. Though different from our typical guests on the Business of Defense, I am certain you'll find our conversation insightful, and it might even leave you asking more questions. Joining me today is the Honorable Russ Rumbaugh, the former Assistant Secretary of the Navy, Financial Management, and Comptroller. He left his position with the Department of the Navy on January 20th after over 2 years in the role equivalent to a Chief Financial Officer position. He's had a career spanning the public and private sectors, as well as academia. During his most recent time with the Department of the Navy, he spearheaded the department's financial management transformation, which included both the financial statement audit and modernization of financial systems. Those efforts by Honorable Rumbaugh and his team directly supported mission accomplishments for fleet commands, Marine Expeditionary Forces, and other departmental forces. I'm eager to chat and get his take on his time with the department, what he sees as his biggest accomplishments, and what work is left to be done. And I think what everyone wants to know is, what is he doing next? Russ, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Rich.
Absolutely. Well, let's start at the top. For those who don't know, can you talk a little bit about the scope, the role, responsibility of the Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Financial Management and Comptroller?
Absolutely. It's one of the great jobs, in my opinion, to have. You're responsible for 10,000 financial managers throughout the Department of the Navy, and I love it because you're responsible for the budget process to the Secretary, the CNO, and the Commandant of the Marine Corps to help them staff their decisions and do all that nitty-gritty, the financial management, the financial systems that keep everything going. That scope means you're always involved, but at the same time, you always have to be an honest broker.
You're pretty much involved in every decision, right? Because in the department, nearly every decision that's made, whether it's operational, HR, intel, whatever, it always has a resource implication.
I think it's important to be careful with that. You can be in every decision, but you have to prove your value for being there. If you just assume everything has a dollar sign, that does not get you in the door. You need to prove why it's worth thinking about this from a financial management perspective. If it's always with an agenda, nobody's going to want to hear you. Now, the great thing, you're sitting on, especially in the Department of the Navy, you're sitting on a team of 350 financial managers in FMNC, plus those 10,000 people throughout the entire Department of Navy. And so there is a great deal of expertise, there is a great deal of perspective, and I always found the bosses did want to hear what my team had to offer.
Well, I was going to ask, how did you ensure that you had a seat at the table? You're right, it's got to be about value add. And so how did you ensure that?
It's a great question. It's a question actually pertinent to people throughout their career. Again, I had the benefit of what I absolutely believe is the best FM team in defense financial management. And so we always had some interesting thing, and I was just the conduit for it. The important thing, and my suggestion for people at every stage of their career, is remembering what is your boss's perspective. You don't want to walk in just trying to say, this is the answer, this is the answer. You have to understand where they're trying to go and make sure they understand. In financial management, you need to help them understand how to do that. You need to help them with compliance. Hey, I understand where you're trying to go, boss, but if you go that way, we're going to run afoul of some basic compliance, some basic legality. But at the same time, you don't want to be a no person. How do we get to where you're going, and what's the best way to do it? And I think it is possible to do it. It's something important to start when you're early in your career, and nothing like having a good team to make it easier.
You mentioned, the importance of understanding your boss's priorities, and I think from a line and block chart, you probably had one boss, but in reality, because you mentioned also serving the Navy and the Marine Corps in your position at the Department of the Navy, you had multiple bosses. Is that safe to say as well?
Absolutely. Of course, when push comes to shove, Title 10 is very clear that first the Secretary of Defense and then his delegation down to the Secretary of Navy do have the authority, direction, and control for the Department of Defense, and then within that, the Department of the Navy. But yes, busy people all trying to do a lot of things. I absolutely thought I was staffed to the Commandant and to the Chief of Naval Operations as much, and to support the SecDef and his always thought I was responsible to Mike McCord, the CFO for DoD writ large. So you have both your organizational reporting chain and a functional reporting chain. I never felt a tension in that. I was fortunate the Navy and Marine Corps team were what the nation needed, so there was very little tension between it, but it is two different things that you're always keeping an eye on.
Now let's go back about a little over 2 years when you stepped into the position. You obviously had some thoughts in mind what your priorities would be. What were those and how did those change once you actually took the seat?
I was very fortunate. The most important thing is how good the Dillon Financial Management team is and the career leadership that's still there. When I walked in, I had a whole slew of meetings I wanted to set up. I knew we needed to make sure we were talking to the workforce. And I looked around and was like, oh, all of this is already in place. So much so I had to actually modify what I was talking about to emphasize these were the personal priorities of me. They did not supersede the broader Dawn FM strategy, which nests within the DoD FM strategy. That broader strategy, those broader FM strategies help our community. If you'll allow me to boast about the administration, they were very hard to emphasize nesting everything under the national defense strategies. That top level made a big difference. It's true, I still did have my own priorities. For me, they were grow the Dawn in a healthy way, make hard choices without haste, and keep the best FM team the best.
So let's talk about accomplishments then. How did you do on those?
It's great. I think we did fairly well. Most importantly, you always have to have the workforce, right? It is the people who make things happen. Nothing happens without those people. I believe we managed to sustain the team, who I absolutely think are the best, and because of their accomplishments can point to them. I hope they feel that way too. I believe they felt I helped steward their excellence and brought them to the attention they deserve, including appearing here on this to talk and boast about what they did. The two more substantive accomplishments, very proud of how, with the Department of the Navy, we made sure budget was tied to strategy. And I think you see that in a few specific examples that I'm glad to talk about. And then the second one is what I would emphasize as continuing progress on the audit. Fully recognize that we were part of a flow and it wasn't just us alone, but this multi-year effort, nonpartisan effort to actually improve our national security outcomes. I think we did manage to move the ball, building on what came before us and setting up in the future, both on the audit itself and on the underlying things like systems to set up the future.
So two issues there, budget to strategy and audit. Let's go deeper. Which one do you want to tackle first?
Glad to do either one. Should we start with audit, which has more of a technical component?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's do it. So obviously the Marine Corps achieved a clean audit opinion. I think the first service to do so under your watch. Congratulations again to you and the incredible team, the Navy Marine Corps team who helped bring that about. What do you see as some of the key elements of their success, and how can those lessons learned be used by the other services in the department to achieve a clean audit?
It is absolutely the question, and in fact, the department asked that question explicitly. The Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps himself presented to the Defense Deputy Secretary's Management Advisory Group, the most senior standing body, to talk about what those lessons from the Marines were. Before I get into lessons, though, I have to demur a little bit. The Marine Corps opinion, more than any other, made me very aware of how much work it takes to get there, how much the Marines themselves did, how much the Department of the Navy supported them, and how much we got support up at OSD and from Congress to clear roadblocks. In there, more than anything else, I'm aware that I just happened to be there at the right time and cannot claim to be the one who really did it because I saw how much work everybody did.
Can you talk a little bit more about some of those roadblocks, some of those what I would call institutional or systemic roadblocks?
The first one was the Marines excelled at tone from the top. The Commandant, first General Berger and then General Smith, were very clear that they wanted an audit opinion. They understood directly from members of Congress, they understood their responsibility to the American taxpayer, and they were always very, very clear that they cared about that. That made a huge difference. You didn't have, now, the Marines have an advantage. The Marine Corps does a little better than other organizations about when the boss says, I want this, everybody does their best to achieve it. Nevertheless, the clear signal from the Marine Corps leadership all the way down, and you could feel that. That was also true at every other level of leadership we had. I knew the SecDef was signing an audit priorities memo every year. I knew he was personally engaged. I knew the deputy secretary publicly talked about how much she was paying attention to this, and I always had great support from the Secretary of the Navy, Carlos Del Toro, and his undersecretaries that it had to be. So that tone from the top was the first one. You can already see how much people realize it makes a difference. One of the things I'm proudest of, again, is not actually something I did, but the Vice Chief of Naval Operations, who's been on the job for about a year, he came in, the first thing he said is like, hey, I need to prioritize audit. He signed out a nav admin under his name to the entire fleet, emphasizing. So you're seeing that tone from the top in other services. Of course, I'm a little biased and think the Navy cares more than everybody else, but you can see it in the other services and the other agencies in DoD too.
How important are financial systems integration, modernization, the feeder systems that maybe the logistics systems, the personnel systems, the maintenance systems that are all feeding into the financial systems that have to support the clean audit? And I know the Marine Corps also changed out their financial system, about a year and a half, 2 years before achieving the clean audit. How important was that in that success?
Unbelievably important and incredibly hard to describe to people. Other than the fact that there is a before and an after, a modern financial management system versus a legacy, all of that's happening there is very, very hard to describe. I now have a canonical sea story I tell on a regular basis. One of my great prides was getting to go talk to financial managers. I was out at a Marine Corps installation and sat down and had lunch with some Marine Corps comptroller team there. And I say, hey, how hard was it getting that Marine Corps clean opinion? It was a big accomplishment where everybody's very proud of you. Thank you very much. And they go, oh, that was easy. We did some samples from the travel system. It wasn't very, it's like, oh, well, that wasn't the answer I was expecting. I thought this was a big deal. A little later on, I go, well, how was the transition to DAI, the Marines, modern financial management system? They're like, oh my goodness, that was unbelievably painful, incredibly difficult, and stressed us all the time. I was like, oh, that's what you did for the clean audit opinion. We cannot get to a clean audit opinion unless we are in modern financial management systems, because those legacy systems are throwing off so much chaff, so many unmatched transactions, so many dollar figures you can't trust, so many steps that the IPA, the independent public auditors, can't confirm. If those legacy systems are there, you can never chase down every rat hole. Until you're in a modern system, you can't do it. One of the things I'm most proud of is something that hasn't actually happened yet. The Navy side, so this will be every single part of the Department of the Navy, come the new fiscal year that starts in just October, so months away, will be operating in a modern financial management system. Our last 3 commands in the Navy are migrating as we speak. I believe we will be the first military department to be totally in a modern financial management system, and that sets up further progress on the audit, and we should come back and talk about what that gives you on the budget and strategy side too.
Yeah, that's a tremendous accomplishment. You are listening to The Business of Defense with my guest, the Honorable Russ Rumbaugh, the former Assistant Secretary of the Navy, Financial Management and Comptroller. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Business of Defense, sponsored by the Society of Defense Financial Management on Federal News Network. I'm talking with the Honorable Russ Rumbaugh, the former Assistant Secretary of the Navy, Financial Management and Comptroller. With a diverse military, government, corporate, and academic background, he has forged a path that is as much a tribute to his hard work and dedication as it is to his expertise and reputation. He has also been actively engaged in the defense financial management community, including earning our very own Certified Defense Financial Manager certification. I'm sure Honorable Rumbaugh has learned some lessons and has some inspiring stories for those who aspire to follow in a similar path to the ones he has charted. Russ, before we jump into the linking budget to strategy, let's talk a little bit more about your background and your strategy to getting to this position. You started out some time in the Army as an infantry officer, have worked in government, both on the Department of Defense and on the Hill, in think tanks and academia. So can you talk a little bit about all of that formative background and how it led to where you are today?
Absolutely, and this is kind of exciting. Now that I am a former, I can start talking about that Army time again, something I didn't want to boast about while sitting in the Department of the Navy, that I grew up in the wrong service. So it's nice to come back to my roots a little bit. Maybe the fundamental moment was when I was sitting in graduate school and looked around and realized another way to describe policy was just everybody's opinion, and realized I needed to have a little more technical to bring. And I committed to the budget side, to being financial management and being aware of that, including going and taking statistics. And in fact, one of my great teeth-cutting jobs was as a temp worker after my time in the service, where I was responsible for just a Microsoft Access database analysis. But that fundamental understanding of databases has been key to knowing how to unlock the budget to help strategy and leadership decisions. I've enjoyed it tremendously, and I'm honored to have gotten to come up and be a part of this great team.
So you're saying you started out, you had the opinions, you had strong opinions. You need to marry it up with some technical expertise. Is that?
Luckily, I think there is a feedback loop there of when you do the technical expertise, the opinion flows out of that, and you realize, oh, here's some of the pros and cons. I love budget as a staffing process. One of my favorite descriptions of a budget is from the classic Atlantic article about the education of David Stockman, Ronald Reagan's OMB director. And it described it. Budget is a sort of rolling record of decisions. And I love that, and how much the process itself can tee that up. That process gets stronger the more rigor and analytical detail you have underneath it, which is why it ties so much back to audit as well.
And as you were navigating your career on this path, were there any mentors that helped you along the way that you'd like to mention, or any specific advice they may have given you?
I think Rich might just be fishing for a compliment for himself. It's painful how much I've had to rely on Rich and his guidance all the way along. I've been incredibly lucky in having people who took a time to care about me. I will say, especially for those earlier in their career, it is a little embarrassing to look back and realize how many people stopped and gave me advice, and I didn't even appreciate how much they were doing for me. So it's not just that I was favored, I think I was lucky enough to recognize I was getting advice. And almost everybody is probably getting more help and support than they realize, recognizing that is incredibly hard to do in the moment, but looking back, it becomes more and more obvious.
Let's get back to the discussion of linking budget to strategy. There's a lot going on in the world, a lot of global challenges. There's a lot going on within the department, reform efforts, the audit that we talked about. What do you see as kind of the critical elements, that need to be found in the budget to address these multifaceted challenges that we see out here, both at the macro level and internal from an organizational perspective?
Well, the fundamental challenge you're poking at is the budget better flow from strategy, and it doesn't always. I just mentioned that rolling record of decisions. If you don't manage to go back and update that, because it's not a single choice, it's a rolling record, and you have a bunch of decisions to do. So it takes real effort, it takes it over time, and it takes weighing costs and benefits at every turn. That's why the budget process, as much as the final outcome, is so important, because you can help senior leaders tee that up and make the choices that bend in the direction they want to go.
Is it measurable? I mean, is it clearly measurable, or is it a little fuzzy and hard to, and also some of these longer term efforts aren't immediately measurable? So.
Well, nothing like sitting here and talking to you in the winter of 2025 of trying to figure out what's measurable for the tenure of I was there. So I'm sympathetic. But no, that's the beautiful thing about budget and financial management, is you do have a discrete way to check. Where are the dollars? I always feel sorry for my policy colleagues. No matter how well written a memo is, it is possible to craft a sentence where everybody can see the answer they want in that sentence. Whereas when you're dealing on the financial management side, I have $1, and if I put it here, everybody can see it, and if I put it there, everybody can see it. So everybody can see the decision that is being made, and that creates a more distinct choice and record, and why the budget process ends up being a decision-making process for so many more things, as you talked about, because it touches everything, and you can convert everything into the same denominator, dollars.
One of the topics that's critically important to our national strategy, that's our industrial base. And you dig a little deeper, obviously there's the defense industrial base as it relates to shipbuilding as well. Can you talk a little bit about your perspectives on the shipbuilding industrial base, and maybe even link it to audit, because I know you were somewhat vocal about, I think it was equipment in the hands of contractors, and that the impact of achieving an audit with that.
Absolutely. This gets at what were the accomplishments. I think we did two things really well about connecting budget to strategy. The first one is a fundamental, just a rebalance to the Navy and Marine Corps, something the geopolitical environment calls for. Obviously, it was kind of fun being it was an honor to be on the receiving end where I was advocating for the place that the leadership was trying to turn it to. But nevertheless, we did that. We are currently under a continuing resolution. We were under a continuing resolution last year, and even with that focus on the Navy Marine Corps, we weren't sure we were going to get the resources the CNO, the Commandant, and the Secretary of the Navy had identified. The budget team, the Dawn budget team, went through and came up with a fully quantified and realistic way of what we would do in those changed circumstances. I, of course, am relieved not to have done that, but that ability to do it is why we were able to make the case for increased funding for the Navy and Marine Corps over these last few years. From the Secretary of the Navy's tenure, the Dawn budget grew by 28%. So I think that's a great one. You already teed up the second part of that. What is our relationship with our industrial partners? Something that usually does not belong to the financial management community. The operators need to talk to them, the requirements people need to talk to them, the acquirers need to talk to them. The financial managers are usually a little bit in the background. But shipbuilding cost growth is one of the most pressing things for both the Navy and the Marine Corps. That was true throughout the Biden administration, and the Trump administration has already said that. I am very proud of how much we kept flagging that, hey, this is our big vulnerability. If we don't change this growth, no matter how much money Congress gives us, we will not be able to change that. One of the most frustrating things was in my tenure, the Department of the Navy had the largest budget in real terms since 1988. We spent more on shipbuilding than at any time since 2001, 13%, and before 2001, it was 1988 again. So these were peak times, and yet in 2025, we only requested 6 ships, when to achieve what the CNO wants, you need to buy a dozen ships or more every year. The FM community did wade into that conversation. We did become a part of that to flag we can't be making near-term decisions that keep setting this up. That changing relationship with the shipyards, who are absolutely critical partners and have been for 100 years, is fundamental, but we have to be looking forward and making sure that relationship stays in balance and takes care of U.S. national security.
So it sounds like it's going to take the coordinated efforts of both the public sector and the private sector here.
Absolutely.
What do you see as your expectations on the private sector side? I mean, how can they really assist in this area?
Well, especially on the audit side, we already have that assistance. You brought up government furnished property, right? This is the United States of America. We have been relying on the private sector for a very long time. We haven't built a new ship in a public yard in 50 years or in 30 years. We absolutely need our private sector properties. We absolutely believe in entrepreneurship. We absolutely believe in the profit motive. That doesn't need to be an adversarial relationship. And we saw that on the audit side with government furnished property. We had been having trouble getting clarity on that. When the Secretary of the Navy volunteered to just write the CEOs, they were like, oh, well, we didn't know this was important to you. Now that it's important, they were willing to have a conversation. That's great. That not knowing flags what I think is the biggest challenge both for the audit and budget side of the financial management community. And that is we can't get stuck in stovepipes. We need to move across communities. On the audit side, the FM community has said all along, it can't just be FM work. We already talked about that command leadership, but it also has to be all those functional communities. Just as I had an organizational boss, the Secretary of the Navy, and had a functional boss, the DoD CFO, that's true of everybody. The contracting community has so many things they worry about. Remembering to say, and please account for your government furnished property, is hard for them to prioritize. But if we don't do that, we will never be auditable. And that's the state we got to. Coming into this administration, I think everybody was just yell at components. Components, you need to do better at audit. Well, with leadership from the Secretary of the Navy, the CNO, the Commandant, the ACMAC, the VCNO, it is no longer the components, Navy and Marine Corps. It becomes the communities. And we need our acquisition partners, we need our CIO partners, we need our contracting partners to help in that conversation. And that is new and exciting, and a sign we're making progress, even as we need to break that down.
Yeah, these complex problems demand solutions from the community and not just the stovepipes. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, but we do want to end on one topic, and since we're on the private sector, we'll ask you, so what's next for you now that you are in the private sector?
Well, it's kind of nice that I'm not actually technically in the private sector yet. What I am is at loose ends. It makes it free to come back and review what happened in the last couple of years and talk about how great the financial management community is. I absolutely intend to remain an active member of the financial management community and hopefully get a chance to say interesting things about it. I look forward to continuing to hang out with you, SDFM, and all of those financial managers out there.
Fantastic. We look forward to future engagement. I'd like to thank today's guest, the Honorable Russ Rumbaugh, former Assistant Secretary of the Navy Financial Management and Comptroller, for his time, his frankness, and his insights on the latest transformations underway in the Department of the Navy and at the Department of Defense. Visit sdfm.org to learn more about our Defense Financial Management community and consider pursuing the Certified Defense Financial Management Certification too, as the Honorable Rumbaugh did, to distinguish yourself in the field of defense financial management. This year, we are celebrating the 25th anniversary of the CDFM certification program and honoring all the professionals who have dedicated their expertise and made it the gold standard in defense financial management today. Watch The Business of Defense next month, where we bridge the gap between the boardroom and the battlefield to advance the mission of national security. I'm Rich Brady, CEO of the Society of Defense Financial Management. You are listening to the Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search SDFM. Thank you.